coming from, who is it sold to, for what price it is sold to, because there is their loan repayment. And the confidence they have in the structure, because it determines how well the farmers or the exporters is going to service their debt. And I think that also applies to our national debt. Debt serviceability is an issue for when it also comes to national level. But when it comes to export market, we have huge market like US, UK, EU. Now we have direct flight to Canada, and we have a similar taste and preference customers in this market that we can tap into. But we need some structure in our backyard so that we can get products rolling. Again, that's an overview of the Fiji ginger market, export market. We've got the Netherlands. And again, one of the things we learned during this research is different markets. Again, some of this information are company sensitive, they're company specific information, which we will be only able to share with the consent of the different company that we work with. But in a nutshell, we look at this different huge market, and our product goes in as ingredients. It goes into this ingredient market as ingredients for bakeries, ingredients for chocolate making, and of course into the wider restaurants and cafes that are out there that buy our products mainly for ingredients. And I think the challenge on us is to understand the market better, and that's one of the key components of value chains financing is the market-driven or the market orientation approach, where we work with the market from the market backwards so that we can then stagger our production accordingly. With a lot of green and blue economy, fundings coming in, there's a lot of opportunity for our farmers to tap into this into this funding opportunity so that they can increase their production, continue to practice good husbandry practice, sustainable farming practice, so that we can better service this market. Again, these are some of the key characteristics of a value chain. I don't want to bore you with the details. Again, it comes down to strengthening the links between our farmers and, of course, the buyers, the end buyers. How well do our people here in Fiji know the different tastes and preferences that are out there, or the uses for our products out there? Tailor-made loan facilities. We have a lot of, fortunately, with the UKTP program, we received some funding from this project to actually develop a facility specifically for ginger farming. And through the program, Fiji Development Bank actually came up with an online facility where farmers can log in and actually apply for the ginger facility and get the funding online within a tap of the mobile phone. So timely disbursement of fund to farmers because of the seasonal nature that I was talking about. We have a small window of growing. We have sorry, let me slow down a bit. We have a short window of seasonality because of our tropical nature. We have a short window for growing and harvesting of our crops. And we need to tailor the facility so that disbursement is done on a timely basis. We don't want to block our loan application for our farmers who are tapping into the seasonal market to be blocked down with a normal SME and agriculture loan. Because, by the time they get the funds, the planting season is gone. Okay? So those are some of the things that we think that we can improve our value chain financing structure. Strengthening our relationship with farmers and exporters through contract, partnership with financial institution, and of course, constant communications between and collaboration between all the players. The exporters, if you are exporters here in the room, they need to make farmers understand the expectation of the market. Only then farmers can grow and plan their practices accordingly. And of course, it has to be a market-driven approach. We have to look at like I said, the window in terms of the seasonality. Okay? Which particular window can we target into the EU, the Australian, and the regional market, so that we can make a dent. Otherwise, we will always be limited by our scale. And I think in recent discussion with other stakeholders is the idea of, because we are limited by scale in the Pacific, the idea of aggregating a Pacific brand, getting together our products. For example, our coconut. Our coconut is abundant. It's all over the Pacific. It's in all the Pacific Island country. How can we leverage on our, naturally organic environment to sort of build a Pacific brand, so that our coconut can go into the different, cosmetic and beauty markets in the UK and EU. And that needs regional collaboration. It needs regional, we spoke about trade. Melanesian Spearhead is also looking at how we can aggregate some of this product into this different market. But all in all, again, I want to end with this statement that when it comes to servicing of external debt, servicing of our of the financial crisis that we're with, the question I want to ask ourselves: what do we have? Where can we start? And I think that will set the platform for bigger things to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lagi. We have not had too much discussion over the last few days about the P word, poverty. So there's a good reason why in an economic update, we would also want to get talking about agriculture a bit, which a few interesting facts. I'm not sure everyone is across this. So agricultural employment in Fiji, around 30% now. Guess what it used to be about 30 years ago? According to ILO stats, about 15, it's doubled. So people moving more to agriculture. And poverty itself is much higher in the countryside, about 25%, as we'll know from some analysis that Dr. Gunda has done recently. And the rates are much higher in agriculture itself. 60% of poverty in Fiji is in the agricultural sector. So I did just want to make these brief points, because some of these opportunities and in finding out where these value chain opportunities are and increasing productivity is still a pretty important topic that, in my view, we don't talk about probably enough from the distributional perspective. With that, I'll stop talking and hand over to Fantasha, who is going to tell us some good news, I think.
Bulavinaka. No, I didn't hear you. No, I heard you. Thank you, everybody. I'm Fantasha Lockington, and I'm from the Fiji Hotel and Tourism Association. I apologize in advance. I'm a little croaky from recovering from a nasty bout of the flu about a week ago. So I'm going to dive right in. I have, because I'm from tourism, I have lots of beautiful pictures, as you would expect. But first, the news. You must always have the news. So this is what it looked like in 2019 before the pandemic. Almost 900,000 visitors, 3 billion in tourism taxes and revenue earnings. Around 70% of our resorts and hotels are locally owned. 90% ownership is locally owned for transport, tours, activities, and supply lines. And a significant amount of revenue and taxes are generated as spin-off from tourism. Okay, that didn't work this time. Where's your button? There we go. There we go. Thank you. So borders closed in March 2020, didn't open until November 2021, and revenue declined by 92%. So our arrivals went from 146,900 in 2020 to around 31,000 in 2021. We had a few small tourism initiatives called the Blue Lane. If you're not aware of what it is, we allowed under special consideration super yachts and smaller yachts to come in, spend a couple of days being out in a restricted area, and then allowed to stay at a resort that was just used for their purposes. We had local specials, we had repatriation flights, but all this did was keep some of the lights on. SMEs closed. Many of these SMEs have not got back up again, especially our smaller tourism-owned properties out in the outer islands. But what happened was that tourism's multifaceted linkages into communities, supply chain networks, and large employment base actually collapsed and revealed to many who did not appreciate it at the time, the overdependence on the industry to keep the economy going. So during the 20 months of border closures, the industry met frequently. First, we met amongst ourselves because we were quietly freaking out. And then we met with stakeholders, and then we met with government. Excuse me. And we identified a few key issues very early. What are you doing? I'm sharing the screen. Okay. So what we did is we identified very early that the border closures would be long. No one actually believed that. We knew it would go for 12 months or more. And we owe a great deal to the Australian government, I need to say, because we realized that the vaccination program was going to be our only way out. And we realized that very, very early. We had actually met with the previous government and said to allow the tourism industry to vaccinate our workers, to allow us to do that. They considered that initially as a very bad idea, but eventually were able to be convinced by others, not just the industry, that it needed to be a whole of Fiji, a national approach to vaccinations. And we owe a lot to the Australian government and other development partners that came along and provided those vaccines that we so urgently needed. What we also determined at the time was that we needed to work very closely with government to support efforts on the vaccine communications and the vaccination logistics, because we could see that the public sector wheels were turning far too slowly. We continued at the same time to keep the Fiji branding ready to go out into our key markets, the key message being that safety would be our key priority when we reopened. At the same time, we were conducting very valuable market research, especially in our key markets, but all around the world. And we're trying to find out what were people feeling, what were they thinking when they were locked up in their own countries? What were they afraid of? If they were thinking about traveling, when was that going to be? And what was travel going to look like when they eventually traveled? What were they searching for online? What images were being looked at and how often? What were people dreaming of doing while they were being locked up? Now, Fiji Airways, the national airline, at the same time needed to be ready to go. They kept crew trained, they had aircraft maintained, they had schedules prepared, all this at very, very high costs. We also worked on making the hotels part of the Border Health Protection Unit to test, to collect data, to transmit information to the Border Health Protection Unit, as well as train and prepare and manage COVID cases that would happen in-house. It took some convincing, but we got there. A COVID-safe protocol was prepared and adopted industry-wide. The Care Fiji commitment was trained and implemented. That was all in 2022. Where is that next? Here we go. These are just some of the information that RBF has. The successful reopening was down to a few major things. The entire industry was committed, both to opening safely, but to getting the opening right. We had watched other destinations get it so wrong, countries with far bigger economies than Fiji's. We consulted widely like never before, with the public sector especially. There was consistent discussions on recommendations, amending regulations, understanding how the different segments in tourism worked, coming up with solutions, arguing against suggestions that didn't make sense to us, because some suggestions were coming out of manuals that were written in the 1950s, and we said, no, it's not going to work. As an example, initially it was recommended that when Fiji opened, every visitor had to be quarantined for 14 days. Then they brought that down to 7 days. We said, guys, if we're going to do that, no one's going to come. And if you recall, Singapore made that mistake as well. I also believe it's terribly underappreciated that one of the key success factors for Fiji's reopening was because we have our own national airline. There was no reliance on anyone else, and the airline at considerable costs was ready to go. Once they started, every month or so, they kept their flights going, and they kept increasing. We were small, or we are small, we're very nimble, and we're ready. But as an industry, we needed to be trusted to do the things that we said we could. Private sector usually does things of its own accord. It has the experience and expertise, but public sector works very differently. And the two don't often get together to work on things when it comes to a challenge. And the pandemic was the biggest challenge that Fiji and the world, if it as it was, had ever faced. And we found that we could not do this on our own. And we knew that government couldn't do it on its own. So we worked very, very hard to get them to trust us and to get them to give us the support that we needed to get things going. We knew the world was watching, our Pacific Island neighbors were watching, and people were probably saying, look at those mad Fijians, they're going to kill people. But we didn't. We really didn't kill anybody. Excuse me. We accepted that the cost of making COVID-safe changes was necessary. Sanitizers, putting in wash stations, heat scanners, downloading apps that didn't even work. PPEs like gloves and masks and aprons and full body covers like we were hazmat operators. Testing for staff twice monthly. Can you imagine the cost of testing 600 staff in the largest resort twice a month? Using medical staff to test guests, requiring extra administrative staff to take the test results down and send the data to the Border Health Protection Unit, to install air purifier units in closed spaces and in conference room, to have separation glass installed, to close bars, to reduce the size of restaurants, to put staff on leave for 7 days as soon as they got tested positive, when we were already really short-staffed. Did you know that tourism properties were testing their staff right up to last month? Right up to last month, we were still testing our staff for COVID. I actually think that the Ministry of Health got so used to the wonderful data we were providing them, they couldn't let it go. So we waited, we've been pushing back for a little while, but we waited until the WHO actually made the announcement that COVID was no longer considered a global risk, to really push back a little harder to say, guys, it's time to let this one go. And they finally allowed us to stop. The marketing in our key markets, even when they were still closed, continued to go out to remind them that we were reopened, even though they were still closed, that we were safe, and that we had lots and lots of wide open spaces with lots of clean, fresh air. We ramped up images of the kinds of things that the research told us that people were looking for. Beautiful, clean oceans, miles of beaches, anything to do with wellness and nature, connecting with communities and people, keeping our oceans and environments clean. By December 2022, we felt like we'd held our breath for 13 months. Several things that happened for us to take stock of. Demand for Fiji was way higher than even we had expected, and we didn't actually get a low season at all through the year. We usually have 2 low seasons in a year. People were visiting who had never been before. Initially, Fiji was the only show in town that was open, and other competitor destinations were either not opened, or if they had opened, weren't trusted sufficiently for visitors to go. People were spending more and staying longer, and people were rebooking to return almost immediately after traveling here. It's now June 2023. It's 19 months since reopening and 6 months into the year, and what's happening? There are now daily flights to Los Angeles, Sydney, and Auckland. There are 5 flights a week to Brisbane, and between 2 and 4 flights a week to Christchurch, Wellington, Melbourne, Adelaide, Canberra, Vancouver, Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, and 7 Pacific Island countries, with plans to fly to Seattle, Chicago, and Seoul, and maybe one of the 3 key main Chinese cities. Get your ginger ready, bro. Because there are 2 large Airbuses that are going to be delivered in the next month to Fiji Airways. The good news is that the bookings are holding better than even we expected. As 2023 commenced, again, we should have experienced a low season to kick off the year because surely we thought pent-up demand was now fulfilled, and with it, we should be expecting an ease off on this huge demand. Our key markets, Australia and New Zealand, were starting to feel the impact of increasing inflation and higher interest rates. But in the last 6 months, we've continued to see high occupancies averaging 70 to 90%. Our monthly arrivals have now surpassed our 2019 figures. Forward bookings too are still holding very strong. So surely we must be happy as an industry, you might think. Well, not quite. Still cautiously optimistic, as we usually say. Tourism is a very resilient and continuing industry. We brace quite frequently for weather-related events that have increased in the last 5 years. We're used to political upheavals. We watch and monitor global impacts. And now we've even had the once in 100 years pandemic. Our biggest issue now is with the steadily increasing seat capacity, bringing in more and more visitors to Fiji, and now about to increase further with 2 more wide-body aircraft being delivered, as well as other airlines returning. Room inventory will be short by around 4,000 rooms. Our smaller, affordable backpacker resorts have not been able to reopen, although Airbnb and homestays have sprung up to fill some gaps. In the last decade, there have been very few large resorts constructed. Our investment climate has not been conducive to attracting the types of investment needed. Infrastructure challenges have been in place for just as long and infrastructure has steadily declined, with access to power and water extremely difficult and costly, while waste management infrastructure is at capacity right now, meaning that if an investor wanted to build a 400-room hotel today in Nandi, there would be nowhere for him to hook up his sewage services to. He would need to build his own at a very high cost. The government is now aware of tourism's current limitations, coupled with the understanding that we must first grow the economic pie before we can expect higher tax and revenue earnings that in turn can pay for much needed infrastructure, roads, hospitals, bridges, and basic services, not to mention repaying our growing debt. And that we must improve our current ease of doing business processes. We must attract foreign direct investment, and we must do so quickly. At the same time, we must support other industries move to the next level and consider reviewing the industry that is bleeding our economy out. There are huge opportunities. Agriculture, we're not doing enough. BPO, IT, construction, and manufacturing. These have all been stalled by bottlenecks. There are vast opportunities to support SMEs, and we're not giving them enough room to grow. In the meantime, tourism, no pressure, will continue to do what it does best. The National Tourism Office, Tourism Fiji, recently changed its logo and tweaked its marketing direction to Fiji, where happiness comes naturally. And this was in response to the tracking of data on what people were thinking about during and after the lockdowns, the eventual changing travel trends, and the sentiments towards more sustainable travel and travel destinations. COVID did some terrible things to the world, but it also changed people's perspectives on appreciating the environment, nature, culture, and embracing of wellness and of happiness. We just happen to have all those things here in huge demand and huge amounts that we can share. And we know how to share this. So we're going to continue offering our little paradise to the world when they're looking for happiness, laughter, natural beauty, culture, adventure, activities, experience, and memories. Vinaka. I hope that was the good news you were looking for.
Yeah, I'm sold. I don't know about you guys. We've now got about 25 minutes for discussion from the audience. So I'll invite the speakers to all please come down to the front to the comfortable chairs. We've got microphones down there to do questions. And if you can raise your hand, we will bring a microphone out to you. We might collect 2 questions at a time as we've been doing in other sessions, and then give the speaker some time to respond to them. And please do introduce yourself as you ask your question. That would be great. Looking for hands.
Good afternoon, and Bula Binaka. My name is I.T.S. I'm from the medical profession of the private sector. But my question is not to do with anything about medical. My question is to Langi Fisher, of what you shared with us on the topic, what do we have? Actually, I just came back from the GCC meeting from the island. So I was sitting and then it struck me when you said that, because now I was thinking whether to say it here or I was supposed to be in the other room. But anyway, I will go ahead. I was staying back at the island doing some small repairs for our home. And I came across my late cousin brother's bookshelf. And then I saw this booklet. It's more of a financial report on, as you must have heard of the Rewa Dairy Company. This was before the takeover. I don't know who's taken over now, but interestingly, it was being run by, I think, the Tailevu province, and they had the cows, the bullocks, and they had a very good financial report. And the chairman were mainly the chiefs. Andi Samanunu, Mr. Kamikamida. I went through all the reports and I saw that. And most of the villages from, I think it's Tailevu, more of Kumbuna, they were all shareholders in that company. So, just going back to what for the crisis we're going through, and that's one example. Like nearly all the Itauques or the indigenous from that area, they were somehow from their cooperatives or individual, the chief, commoners, they were all shareholders to that, and it brings back. And I'm just wondering if you have an idea of who's taken over from that. I'm just wondering. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment and the questions. We actually underrate our import substitution opportunities within the country. We have a lot of, like Madam shared about the incoming guests. Most of the products that go into this program are imported products because our value chain are not structured to actually satisfy or meet the requirements for this market into the import substitution. It's just the tourism to start off with, and I think if you go into the supermarket shelf, just go into the cool storage areas. Capsicum from New Zealand is way cheaper than capsicum grown locally, because our doors are wide open in terms of product coming into our country, and our exit is too small to allow us to export into this country with so many restrictions, so many barriers. But I think you mentioned about dairy. our import of dairy products in itself is in 80 to 100 million a year. And I guess if we work together with local producers, local finances, local processors along this supply value chain to give it some structure and organize them so that we have a consistent supply of this product into the market shelf, into the supermarket shelf, then we can start negotiating. Then we can start negotiating with the chefs in the resorts and the hotel, because we can provide the quality and the frequency of the volume of the products or ingredients that they need in order to continue their business open. Like I said, our import substitution market in itself is huge, and with value chain financing, getting some structure, hoteliers love structure, banks love structure, everybody loves structure. If we can have that structure in place, we can definitely realize that opportunity. Thank you. I hope.
Thank you. I just would like, my name is Peter. I would like to thank the panelists for the wonderful presentation that they have given today. I would like just a comment. If history serves me right, Fiji was in debt before, a huge debt. Now, the approach that our leaders did back then was a communal approach, where every village in every community across the country contributed. That's why in our flag, there's a banana there, because that's how we paid our debt. Now, in terms of ginger, I can see the huge potential and the economic value that it can bring us out of this huge debt that we are in. And now, for example, in a 5 acres of land, in every community, in every village, if the government can approach the community to contribute economically for the debt that we can come out in, that we are already drowning in, I believe that we will be debt-free in the next few years. But I'm asking, is that, why can't we do it now when the previous leaders, our previous predecessors have done it before? Thank you.
I think we might get Janesh to comment first, and then Lucky maybe.
Okay, so one of the issues that we need to look at is the way spending has taken place in the past. And as I've mentioned, one of the things which the government needs to do in the upcoming budget is to look at where they're spending and how well they're spending, what is the quality of spending. So expenditure cuts, is not the best option. Okay, the scope for expenditure cut is very limited, in fact, because once you cut the expenditure, you're going to slow the economy. What you can do better is look at quality of spending. So the challenge, which I think the government should actually look at, is to look at spending for the past 16 years, look at where were the project failures, why the project failures actually took place, what are the lessons, and put some very decisive measures and demonstrate prudential economic management. We have to manage our expenditure in a very smart way. So that's one reason that I can give you. The second reason is because a lot of policies were being implemented without proper consultation. That's a recipe for policy failure. When you don't consult the relevant stakeholders, your policies are going to fail. And as you might see, in the first 5 months, this government has adopted a consultative approach. And if you have followed the budget consultation that has been taking place, many businesses have been very vocal about what are the issues. So before you implement any kind of public project, you need to go out there, ask the people, what are your concerns, what are the issues? You need to get the relevant data, that's also important, and then adopt the evidence-based approach to policy making.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. I believe, again, we have a strong resource base, a lot of resources that are out there. But again, we need to create the ecosystem so that we can sort of realize the opportunity in the different sectors. Like our colleague said, there was Previously, we had geographical demarcation of the different commodities and products. And like he mentioned, if we were to resurrect some of this industry, it comes down to how well we created ecosystem in terms of policy. If we're going to do, take for example, banana, what are the market pathway established for banana into the regional market? We can't export banana into Australia and New Zealand because of the threats on biosecurity issues. That sort of discussion needs to be taken up in a sort of a national level on how we can resurrect some of these local industries and what sort of support, what sort of ecosystem do they need so that they can sort of thrive in this, and resurrect into this industry and contribute towards reducing our national debt, of course.
If I can just add, if I was a farmer, let's say in the middle of Lomaibuna somewhere, and I had a banana plantation, and you came and told me that I need to give you 10% of my earnings for my banana production so that I can help pay the government's debt back, I think I'd tell you to take a flying leap. So I think you need to build a lot more consultation and consensus around why we need to support the government do what it needs to do, and how individually we can contribute to that, rather than simply saying to people that you need to be, a lot more supportive. People need to understand what the problem is first, and this is the first time we're starting to talk about it in the last 6 months. And I think it needs to go from there. It's still early days yet, but I think that communication needs to build up within our population.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd just like to commend all the presenters for the wonderful presentation that you presented. Before I ask my question, I'd just like to make a comment and try to answer that lady's question about Redire. I'm from the province of Televu, and as much as we would have wanted it to be owned by the Televu province, it was actually formerly owned by it was a cooperative, and each farmer, I came from a dairy farm family, so each farmer was a shareholder. And it wasn't only confined to the Confederation of Kumbuna, Namosi, Serua, other provinces. So you're right in the fact that I thought it was much more efficiently run when it was a cooperative. But I think in the past administration, the political administration, what the reforms and the restructure they did was try to boost productivity. Because I'm not sure about the current figures or statistics, but in terms of our production, we only produce 20% of domestic consumption in terms of dairy products. The rest of the 80% is imported. So I thought I'd just make that comment to help answer your question. But my question is actually directed towards Dr. Sami. I thought you did a great presentation, but my question lies in how can we, not only as a country, but as a region, and I thought as a USP being the premier institute, or so-called premier institute for the region, for Pacific Island countries, I thought it would be best if we could come up with solutions in how we can insulate our national economies with the COVID supply disruptions of supply chains, the current geopolitical tensions, from Ukraine, this recent buildup of BRICS. The question is, how can we work on externalities and how we can mitigate it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. As far as your question is concerned, USP as a regional premier university can engage in meaningful partnership on number of areas. One area is research, consultancy. These kinds of partnership is very essential to take an evidence-based approach. The way forward for inclusive, sustainable, long-term development is to take an evidence-based approach informed by relevant stakeholders. So that's where the research comes in. The second thing that we can do is to look at economic diversification. One of the reasons why our economy is vulnerable now is because the previous government failed to seriously consider economic diversification. Now, if you read the literature on Fiji's economy from 1970s to 2022, one of the common things that you'll find is economic diversification. So the major challenge for the coalition government in the upcoming budget is to provide a platform for strategic economic diversification. You need to identify certain sectors which will diversify the economy so we are better able to respond to shocks, right? So that's very, very important. The other thing, if you're looking at geopolitical issues in the region, these things will probably intensify over the years. What is important is that we have a rules-based kind of regional cooperation between the major players. Now, whatever tensions that will take place abroad will of course affect the region in one way or the other, right? But what is important is regional cooperation. And I think Australia, New Zealand, and many other new players are increasingly realizing the challenges for the Pacific. So whatever is happening in the Pacific needs to take a Pacific approach. So that's one of the other things that I can mention. But as far as whatever is happening abroad, these things are beyond our control. Now, if you talk about the crisis that's happening in Ukraine, right, and the resulting impact on prices of food and so on. Now, we can't do much about imported inflation, but we can work smartly. And how do you do that? And that's one of the recommendations which I've made. We have one option. One, we should feel sorry for ourselves and say, okay, imported inflation, we can't do much, right? And we have been saying that for about 50 years or so. The other approach is for the coalition government to set up a committee, independent committee, let me correct myself, independent committee who will look at the issue of inflation in detail, right? So you look at it, shipping cost, you look at what can be done in the agricultural sector, right? You're looking at overpricing the supermarkets. So when you are able to bring independent committee made up of relevant stakeholders, we are better able to understand what are the issues relating to inflation, where are the problems, where interventions are possible. Reserve Bank would obviously want to maintain a low inflation, but not everything can be done through monetary policy. There are certain issues, for example, overpricing in the supermarkets. That could be better dealt when FCCC understands what's happening. So the challenge for the coalition government to deal with inflation more effectively is to really better understand inflation by having an independent research done on inflation.
Thank you, Janesh. Next question up the back.
Oh, okay. Thank you. My name is Joe. I'd like to comment on the first speaker. The last time the Fijian economy exceeded 9% growth, or probably the only time, was from 1996 to 1999, as we led up to the 2000 election. And that those figures were prompted by investor confidence, purely investor confidence, because the investors saw that the two warring ethnic groups were finally coming together in the political landscape. Now, of course, the events of 2000 reversed all that. Now he's saying he's coming up again with the 9% growth. I mean, it sounds good, but I'm just wondering how much of that, you've alluded sustainable debt recovery and tourism, or the proper marketing of tourism. But I'm just wondering, what about investor confidence? The same two political parties, when they announced that they were going to go in the last elections, it brought back, memories of what happened. It was a gamble. Many commentators said, oh, this is a gamble. We're going back to, that time. But in hindsight, they've pulled it off. So I'm just wondering, and apart from tourism, we've got potentials in BPO sector, renewable energy sector, agriculture. I'm wondering if all that, and if you're 9%, is that a conservative figure, or should we be more optimistic that we can reach double figures, considering the changes in the political landscape and the changes of the mindsets of investments or investors?
Thank you. So I think, so you made some very great points, but I think if you're looking at a growth rate, you would really want to be somewhat consecutive. You don't want to be over optimistic. So Reserve Bank says 8%, and I'm saying 9% because I think we have 6 months to go and tourism sector can pick up relatively fast. The second is the investor confidence that we can get from the better policies in the upcoming budget. Now, if we are able to improve the race relations in this country, if the coalition government is able to provide very conclusive policies that improves confidence, we can achieve a higher growth rate, right? So we can achieve 10%, 11%, but the challenge would be to sustain it. That's the problem. That is the major problem. It will be very difficult for the economy to sustain a growth rate of 5%, okay, over the next few years. That requires broad reforms in the private sector. We need to find high value sectors, as one of you have mentioned. We need new sectors for growth. And that's the other thing which I mentioned to the other question from that side, that we need to identify more sectors that will drive growth. And that is something that we have not done yet properly. So the way forward is for the government in the upcoming budget, tell us which are the very specific sectors they are targeting. The relevant ministries should be able to tell us where are the opportunities in agricultural sector, where are the opportunities in the healthcare sector. We need more sources of growth to drive recovery and sustainable growth.
We are starting to get close to time, so I might use my exorbitant privilege as chair to ask a question of all of the panel that has been starting to come through as a little bit of a theme. We've got some talk of diversification here, of picking particular sectors, and then we've got a sector down the end where there's arguably a revealed comparative advantage happening from quite a while. And then you were talking a lot about the debt and the budget issues, and that's industrial policy, right? A lot of governments, they love picking sectors, picking areas and winners, but we're not very good at it historically. It often hasn't worked well. And with the new government, it's probably going to happen. So I wanted to perhaps ask the panel, should they even be trying to pick sectors, and how? For Fantasha down the end, that could obviously have some adverse effects for the sectors that might be naturally more competitive. Yeah, and this is big in both agriculture, other ones, and news. I wanted to perhaps get everyone's thoughts, maybe starting with Fantasha.
Thank you. I think the main point needs to be that if you make business easier, if you make you make sure that you have the right policies in place so that you encourage investors to bring the businesses into Fiji, that's a start. Where the university can obviously help is providing the research and the data that would identify to the government what some of these diversified sectors might look like. Where should it be getting the backing or the support of the government? We have huge opportunities, we've said before, in agriculture, and it's the fastest way for us to get a lot of people out of poverty. If you're already in the rural areas, what are we doing to support many of these people out there to have some sort of revenue earning ability? And agriculture lends itself very easily to this. Agriculture can also support what the tourism industry is already doing by reducing the costs for importation, not just for tourism, but also for local use as well. We have wonderful food here in Fiji, wonderful fresh produce, but we don't have the technical expertise, we don't have the resources or the capacity to understand or to help farmers create better avenues for whether it's logistics, transportation, understanding better land use, and understanding what it is that the tourism industry expects in terms of making sure that produce is both supplied in the right quantities, of the right quality, and is consistent. Consistency, just like productivity, is a huge thing in Fiji. We don't do this very well. And a lot of our fresh produce tends to be seasonal. And so this needs to be studied. Another thing that the USB can get behind in terms of research. Langi had mentioned that there's a lot of seasonality because everything's weather related in agriculture for ginger. And I know that we're putting a lot of effort into ginger, turmeric, as well as asparagus, daruka. But there are other items out there that can be done. It's just that we're not focusing on many of these areas. And all of them are not just have the ability to both be used by industries that are already existing, like tourism, as well as be supplying fresher food out to the local population, but they could also provide export markets for Fiji, something we also don't do very well.
So just one comment on what you said. I think the way forward for the country is to have research partnership, but this research partnership needs to be done collaboratively with the government. Those who've actually retired from the government, those who have been experienced in the public sector. It should also include members from the private sector, NGOs, and other sectors as well. Because then it gives you a evidence-based but a more practical approach to dealing with problems. So that would be my comment to that.
You would have one real.
I'll say, let's start with what we can control. Let's start at home. Encourage your kids to buy local-based product, local-made product. Not noodles, but let's start at home by changing the habit of our consumption. We sort of are so ambitious, we're sort of tempted to buy imported products, and we leave our nice, healthy vegetable, you know, or as decoration on the table when we have trainings. But let's start with ourselves. Let's start with what we can control, and by changing habits, consumption habits at home. And I believe that, you know, that's a good start off point for us. And again, in terms of ecosystem, I spoke about ecosystem. We need to protect our local industry to start off with. Like I said, our entry door is wide open. Products, vegetables, and foods from overseas are coming into the market. I know it's needed because we cannot supply it locally, but it's coming in tax-free. It's coming into our country tax-free. You cannot compete with capsicum from New Zealand. It's cheaper to get New Zealand capsicum than locally produced capsicum because there's no tax on it. We don't have any protection for local farmers. So again, on policy level, we need to create an ecosystem where our products can start can have that protection, can then have that preference into the market itself. And thirdly, we should also look at how we can connect locally. Like I said, there's a huge opportunity for import substitution within the tourism sector. There's a huge opportunity for import substitution in the market itself everywhere. I think that's where we can start. Let's start with what we can control and let policy take care of itself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lami. So we are at time, perhaps a few seconds over. So I'm going to say a few things. One very quick point, which is there will be a dinner outside, and just a quick reminder that to help us manage catering, it is invitation only. A much bigger reminder, however, is to please do make sure you come along tomorrow for what is my favorite topic, and that's migration and labour mobility. We've got lots of really cool stuff on tomorrow. And then the last one, I guess, is please joining me in thanking our fantastic panel for a good discussion this afternoon. And yeah, thanks guys, and see you tomorrow.